At 07:42 on February 25, 1944, over the northern coast of New Guinea, Lieutenant Frank Dunn held his P-38 Lightning in a shallow dive. The Mitsubishi A6M0 behind him had closed to 400 yards. Dunn's airspeed indicator read 380 miles per hour, climbing. The Zero's pilot fired again. Tracer rounds arced past the Lightning's twin booms, visible in the canopy's reflection. Dunn pushed the throttle forward. The Allison engines roared louder. He had been airborne for 9 hours and 17 minutes. His fuel gauge showed 32% remaining. The Zero followed. Intelligence reports later filed at Port Moresby noted 14 interceptions that morning. Only 9 American aircraft returned. The P-38's speed advantage was real, but narrow. Below, the jungle blurred into coastal reef. Dunn knew what was coming. Word of a new fighter, faster still, designed to end chases like this one. Lieutenant Frank Dunn pulled back the throttle as the New Guinea coastline disappeared behind him. It was late afternoon on March 3, 1944, and his P-38 Lightning had been airborne since dawn. The fuel gauge read just above reserve. He had flown reconnaissance over WWII, photographed Japanese positions near Hansa Bay, and engaged 2 Zeros over open water. One had broken off, the other had followed him for 30 miles before running low on fuel itself. Dunn's hands were steady on the yoke, but his shoulders ached. The P-38's cockpit was narrow, the seat hard. He had logged 847 flight hours in the Lightning since arriving in the South Pacific in November 1943. The aircraft had saved his life 4 times. Its twin Allison V-1710 engines could push the fighter to 414 miles per hour in level flight, faster than any Zero could match. But the margin was thin. 1 engine failure, 1 fuel miscalculation, and speed became irrelevant. Dunn descended toward WWII airfield as the sun dropped low. Ground crew waited on the tarmac. The Lightning's tires touched down at 17:53 hours. Dunn taxied to the hard stand and shut down the engines. Silence followed, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. He climbed out slowly. His logbook entry that evening recorded 9 hours, 14 minutes of flight time. No kills, no losses, just survival. In the operations tent, intelligence officers reviewed his camera footage. The photos showed Japanese aircraft dispersed along coastal strips, Oscars, Zeros, a few newer models. The briefing officer noted that enemy air activity had increased. American losses were climbing. The P-38 remained the fastest American fighter in the theater, but it wasn't enough. Dunn listened quietly. He had heard rumors of a new aircraft, a single-engine fighter being deployed in Europe. Faster, longer range, more maneuverable. The briefing officer didn't mention it, not yet. Dunn returned to his tent and slept 4 hours. At dawn, he flew again. On April 4, 1944, at Nadzab Airfield in New Guinea, Staff Sergeant Bill Thompson knelt beside the left engine nacelle of a P-38 Lightning. The cowling was open. Oil streaked the aluminum skin. Thompson wiped his hands on a rag, already black with grease. The engine had thrown a rod during yesterday's mission. The pilot had nursed the aircraft back on one engine, landing hard. The propeller blades were bent. The nacelle frame showed stress fractures. Thompson and his crew had been working since 600. It was now past noon. The temperature inside the hangar reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Sweat dripped from Thompson's face onto the engine block. He had been a mechanic with the 475th Fighter Group since January. Before that, he worked at a Lockheed plant in Burbank, California, assembling P-38s on the production line. He knew every bolt, every panel, every tolerance. The Lightning was a complex machine. 2 engines, 2 turbo superchargers, counter-rotating propellers. When everything worked, it was formidable. When something failed, repairs took time. Thompson removed the damaged connecting rod and inspected the crankshaft. Scarring was visible. The entire engine would need replacement. A replacement, Allison V1710, sat in a crate near the hangar door. It had arrived 3 days earlier by transport ship. Thompson and 2 other mechanics began the removal process. They disconnected fuel lines, hydraulic lines, electrical harnesses. The engine weighed 1,395 pounds. A hoist system lifted it clear. By 1800 hours, the new engine was mounted. Thompson reconnected the systems, checked tolerances, secured the cowling. The crew chief signed off on the inspection log. The P-38 would fly again tomorrow. Thompson walked back to the maintenance tent. His hands were raw. His back ached. He had worked 13 hours. Around him, other mechanics worked on other Lightnings. One had taken flak damage over Alexishafen. Another had hydraulic failure. A third needed new tires. The work never stopped. Thompson ate dinner, canned beef, crackers, coffee, and returned to the hangar. Another aircraft had just landed with engine trouble. He picked up his tools. The war continued. On May 10, 1944, in a Quonset hut at Hollandia Airfield, Lieutenant Colonel James Watkins stood before a map of the Pacific. 18 pilots sat in folding chairs, notebooks open. The briefing had begun at 0900. Watkins spoke in a measured tone. Intelligence reports indicated increased Japanese air activity near Biak Island. The 5th Air Force was preparing for Operation Horlicks, a series of strikes to support the invasion. P-38 squadrons would provide fighter cover. The missions would be long-range, over 500 miles each way. Fuel would be critical. Watkins paused. He looked at the pilots. Several had flown over 100 missions. Their faces showed fatigue. The P-38 had proven itself, but the strain was visible. Watkins mentioned something else. A new fighter was being deployed to Europe, the P-51 Mustang. Equipped with a Packard-built Merlin engine, it could reach 440 miles per hour. Its range exceeded 1,000 miles with drop tanks. It was more maneuverable than the P-38, easier to maintain, and cheaper to produce. The Army Air Forces had begun shifting production priorities. Mustangs would eventually reach the Pacific. Watkins didn't say when. The pilots exchanged glances. Lieutenant Dunn sat in the 3rd row. He had heard the rumors. The Mustang's performance in Europe was impressive, escorting bombers deep into Germany, outfighting Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. But the Pacific was different. Longer distances, fewer bases. The P-38's twin-engine redundancy mattered here. Losing one engine didn't mean losing the aircraft. The Mustang had only one engine. Watkins concluded the briefing. The first mission would launch at dawn. Dunn returned to his tent and studied the map. Biak was 520 miles northwest. The P-38 could make it with external tanks. Barely. He checked his flight gear and slept 3 hours. At 0530, he walked to the flight line. Ground crew had already fueled and armed his Lightning. The engines started smoothly. By 0615, 18 P-38s were airborne, climbing northwest into the pre-dawn sky. Below, the jungle faded into ocean. The mission lasted 7 hours. All aircraft returned. But Dunn knew the P-38's dominance was ending. The future was already in motion. On June 15, 1944, at Saipan's Isley Field, Lieutenant Dunn walked across the coral tarmac toward a silver fighter he had never flown. The P-51D Mustang sat alone on the hard stand, its polished aluminum skin reflecting the afternoon sun. Dunn had arrived on Saipan 2 days earlier, as the island was still being secured. Fighting continued in the hills. The airfield, however, was operational. 3 Mustangs had been flown in from Hawaii for evaluation trials. Dunn had been selected as one of the test pilots. He circled the aircraft slowly. The Mustang was smaller than the P-38, lighter, more compact. Its single Packard V1657 engine, a license-built Rolls-Royce Merlin, produced 1,490 horsepower. The four-bladed propeller measured 11 feet across. 650 caliber machine guns were mounted in the wings. The cockpit sat farther back than in the Lightning, offering better rearward visibility. Dunn climbed onto the wing and lowered himself into the seat. The canopy was a teardrop design, providing near 360-degree vision. The instrument panel was simpler than the P-38's. One engine meant fewer gauges. A crew chief briefed Dunn on startup procedures, oil pressure, coolant temperature, manifold pressure. Dunn had flown single-engine trainers before the war, but that felt distant now. He primed the engine and engaged the starter. The Merlin coughed once, then roared to life. The sound was different, deeper, smoother than the Allison engines he knew. Dunn released the brakes and taxied to the runway. The tail wheel steered responsively. He advanced the throttle. The Mustang accelerated quickly. At 90 miles per hour, Dunn pulled back gently. The fighter lifted cleanly. Climb rate exceeded 3,000 feet per minute. At 10,000 feet, Dunn leveled off and pushed the throttle forward. The airspeed indicator climbed 300, 350, 400, 440 miles per hour. The Mustang felt alive, responsive. Dunn banked left, then right. The roll rate was faster than the P-38's. He climbed to 25,000 feet and performed a series of maneuvers, loops, barrel rolls, high-speed dives. The Mustang handled beautifully. After 90 minutes, Dunn returned to Easley Field and landed. He taxied back to the hardstand and shut down the engine. The crew chief asked for his assessment. Dunn looked at the Mustang and said simply, "It's faster." The report went up the chain. Within weeks, Mustang deployments to the Pacific accelerated. On July 3, 1944, over the Solomon Islands, 12 P-51 Mustangs climbed through broken clouds at 22,000 feet. Lieutenant Dunn led the second flight. His squadron had received Mustangs in late June, transitioning rapidly from P-38s. Today's mission was bomber escort, protecting B-24 Liberators striking Japanese positions on Bougainville. Intelligence reported heavy enemy fighter presence. At 0847, radar operators at Guadalcanal radioed a warning. Bandits inbound, bearing 320 degrees, altitude 18,000 feet. Dunn scanned the sky. Sunlight glinted off metal to the northwest. He counted at least 15 aircraft, Zeros, Oscars, and several Nakajima Ki-84 Hayates, a newer Japanese fighter capable of 392 miles per hour. The enemy formation angled toward the B-24s. Dunn pushed the throttle forward. The Mustangs accelerated. At 440 miles per hour, they closed the distance quickly. Dunn selected the lead Zero and fired a 2-second burst. Tracers converged. The Zero's engine erupted in smoke. It rolled inverted and dove. Dunn pulled up sharply. Another Zero crossed in front of him. He fired again. Hits sparkled along the fuselage. The Zero broke left, trailing fuel. Around Dunn, the sky filled with twisting aircraft. A Hayate dove on his wingman. Dunn reversed hard, cutting inside the turn. The Mustang's maneuverability gave him the angle. He fired from 200 yards. The Hayate's canopy shattered. It spiraled downward. Radio chatter filled Dunn's headset. Call signs, warnings, confirmations. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. The Japanese broke off and retreated northwest. Dunn regrouped his squadron. One Mustang was missing. The pilot radioed from low altitude, engine damage, heading for an emergency strip. The remaining 11 Mustangs rejoined the bomber formation. The B-24s continued to target unmolested. By 10:15, the strike was complete. The bombers turned southeast toward home. The Mustangs escorted them back across 300 miles of ocean. All aircraft landed safely except the damaged Mustang, which made it to an auxiliary field and was recovered. Post-mission reports credited the squadron with 7 confirmed kills and 4 probables. No bombers were lost. Intelligence officers noted the Mustang's performance advantage. The P-51's speed allowed rapid engagement. Its range kept it with the bombers throughout the mission. The Ki-84 Hayate was fast, but not fast enough. The balance had shifted. The Mustang was proving itself in the Pacific, mission by mission, engagement by engagement. On August 20th, 1944, at Agana Airfield on Guam, Staff Sergeant Bill Thompson stood beside a P-38 Lightning that would never fly again. The aircraft had returned from a mission over Yap with severe battle damage, one engine destroyed, the tail section riddled with holes, the left boom cracked. Repair was theoretically possible, but replacement parts were scarce. The 5th Air Force was prioritizing Mustang deployments. P-38 squadrons were being re-equipped. This Lightning, serial number 42-68094, would be cannibalized for parts. Thompson had maintained this specific aircraft for 7 months. He knew its quirks: a slight oil leak in the right engine, a temperamental hydraulic pump, a radio that crackled on certain frequencies. The pilot who flew it, Captain Ed Larson, had logged 63 missions in 42-68094. He had named it Dakota Queen after his home state. Larson had been reassigned to a Mustang squadron the previous week. Thompson walked around the Lightning slowly. The twin booms, the distinctive tail, the tricycle landing gear. It had been a revolutionary design in 1941. But the war had moved on. The Mustang was simpler, faster, more cost-effective. Production numbers told the story. Lockheed built 10,037 P-38s total. North American Aviation would eventually produce over 15,000 Mustangs. Thompson's crew began removing usable components, instruments, radios, the undamaged engine. The work took 2 days. By August 22nd, the Lightning was a stripped shell. A bulldozer pushed it to the edge of the airfield, where other wrecked aircraft waited. Thompson didn't watch. He was already working on Mustangs now. The maintenance was different. 1 engine instead of 2, simpler systems, fewer potential failure points. The Packard Merlin was reliable. Parts arrived regularly. The Mustang's in-commission rate exceeded the P-38's. Thompson adapted quickly. But that evening, he walked back to where the Lightning sat. The sun was setting. The aircraft's shadow stretched across the coral. Thompson thought about the missions it had flown, the pilots it had brought home. The P-38 had been essential when speed and range mattered most. It had bridged a gap. Now that gap was closed. In the maintenance log, Thompson made a final entry. P-38F SN 42-68094 removed from service, stripped for parts, struck from inventory. The file closed. The Lightning era in the Pacific was ending quietly, 1 airframe at a time, replaced by a faster machine built for a longer war. On September 10, 1944, in a secured hangar at Iwo Jima, still under Japanese control but being studied for future invasion, American engineers reviewed intelligence photographs of Japanese aircraft developments. The briefing took place not on Iwo Jima itself, but at Pearl Harbor, where captured documents and reconnaissance imagery were analyzed. Lieutenant Commander John Mason, a naval aviator and aeronautical engineer, studied photos of a new Japanese fighter, the Kawanishi N1KJ Shiden. Intelligence indicated it could reach 369 miles per hour and was highly maneuverable. Another aircraft, the Mitsubishi J2M Raiden, could exceed 380 miles per hour. The Japanese were improving, but they were also running out of time, resources, and experienced pilots. Mason's task was different. He was part of a Navy technical evaluation team assessing future fighter requirements. The Mustang had proven itself, but the war would eventually end. What came next? Mason reviewed performance data from both theaters. The P-51D was exceptional, but it was still a propeller-driven aircraft. Jet propulsion was emerging. Germany's Messerschmitt Me-262 had entered service in July. The British Gloucester Meteor was operational. The United States had its own jet program, the Bell P-59 Aerocomet and Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star. Neither was ready for combat, but both represented the future. Mason examined the P-80's specifications. Top speed, 558 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 45,000 feet. It was faster than any propeller fighter, but its range was limited and its engines were temperamental. The technology wasn't mature. Still, the trend was clear. Propeller fighters had peaked. The Mustang might be the best of its kind, but its kind was ending. Mason drafted a report recommending continued jet development, with a focus on reliability and range. The Navy filed it alongside similar assessments from the Army Air Forces. No immediate action followed. The war required proven aircraft, not experimental ones. The P-51 would serve for years, but in quiet offices and engineering labs, the next generation was already taking shape. Mason closed the folder and looked at a photo of a P-51D flying over Saipan. Sunlight gleamed off its wings. It was a beautiful machine, perfectly suited to its moment. But moments pass. Mason knew that in 5 years, maybe 10, the Mustang would join the P-38 in obsolescence. The future was faster, higher, and powered by turbines. For now, though, the Mustang ruled the Pacific skies. On October 20th, 1944, above Leyte Gulf in the Philippines, Lieutenant Frank Dunn banked his P-51 Mustang hard right. Below, the largest naval battle in history was unfolding. American and Japanese fleets clashed across hundreds of square miles. Dunn's squadron was tasked with air superiority, preventing Japanese aircraft from reaching the invasion beaches. At 11:34 hours, radar vectored Dunn's flight toward inbound contacts, 18 Japanese aircraft heading southeast. Dunn spotted them at 15,000 feet, a mixed formation of Zeros and Ki-84 Hayats. He advanced the throttle. The Mustang accelerated to 420 miles per hour. Dunn positioned his flight above and behind the enemy formation. At 1,000 yards, he dove. The Mustangs descended like raptors. Dunn locked onto a Hayate and fired a 3-second burst. The Japanese fighter's right wing disintegrated. It tumbled into the sea. Dunn pulled up sharply, rolled inverted, and selected another target. A Zero attempted to turn inside him. The Mustang's superior speed gave Dunn energy advantage. He climbed vertically, rolled over, and dove again. The Zero couldn't follow. Dunn fired from dead astern. The Zero exploded. Around him, the engagement intensified. Japanese pilots fought desperately. They were outnumbered and outclassed, but they pressed attacks. One Hayate dove on Dunn's wingman. Dunn radioed a warning, then fired from an oblique angle. Hits stitched across the Hayate's fuselage. It broke off smoking. The dogfight descended toward wave-top level. Dunn's altimeter read 800 feet. A Zero crossed in front of him at high speed. Dunn fired instinctively. Tracers found the engine. The Zero nosed down and struck the water. Dunn climbed back to altitude. Fuel was dropping. He had been engaged for 16 minutes. The Japanese formation was shattered. 6 enemy aircraft burned on the water. The survivors fled northwest. Dunn regrouped his squadron. All Mustangs were accounted for, though 2 showed battle damage. They returned to their carrier escort base at Tacloban. Post-mission debriefing credited Dunn's squadron with 9 confirmed kills. No American aircraft were lost. Below, the naval battle continued for 3 more days. The outcome was decisive. Japanese naval power in the Pacific was broken. The Mustang's contribution was noted in after-action reports. Its speed and firepower had helped secure air superiority, allowing the invasion to proceed. Dunn flew again the next day. The missions continued. On November 3, 1944, over Okinawa, not yet invaded but under constant reconnaissance, a flight of 4 P-51 Mustangs encountered the first organized kamikaze attacks. Lieutenant Dunn led the patrol. At 14:07 hours, radar detected a large formation approaching from the north. 43 aircraft. Dunn climbed to intercept. The formation was unusual, slow, deliberate, flying in tight groups. Dunn recognized the tactic from intelligence briefings. These were suicide attackers, aiming for American ships offshore. His orders were explicit: destroy them before they reached the fleet. Dunn radioed coordinates and attacked. The Japanese aircraft were a mix: Zeros, Oscars, even obsolete dive bombers. Many showed external modifications: extra fuel tanks, no defensive armament. They were flying bombs. Dunn opened fire on the lead Zero from 400 yards. It exploded immediately. He pulled up, selected another target, fired again. A second Zero spiraled into the ocean. His wingmen engaged simultaneously. Within 4 minutes, 12 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. The remaining formation pressed on. Dunn pursued. His ammunition counter showed 280 rounds remaining per gun. He fired in short, disciplined bursts. Another Zero fell. Another. The Japanese didn't evade. They maintained course toward the fleet. Dunn's Mustang was faster. He repeatedly overtook targets, fired, climbed, repositioned. The engagement stretched across 15 miles. More Mustangs arrived, a full squadron, vectored by radar. Together they systematically dismantled the kamikaze formation. By 1429, only 6 Japanese aircraft remained airborne. They reached the outer screen of American destroyers. Anti-aircraft fire erupted. 3 kamikazes were shot down. 2 struck a destroyer, causing moderate damage. 1 missed and crashed into the sea. Dunn circled overhead, ammunition exhausted. The sky was empty except for smoke. He returned to base at Ieshima. His flight recorder showed 42 minutes of combat. Intelligence officers debriefed him immediately. The kamikaze tactic was new, desperate, effective. Speed was the only counter, intercepting the attackers before they reached their targets. The Mustang's performance made it possible. A slower fighter couldn't have caught them all. Dunn refueled, rearmed, and launched again at 16:30. Another kamikaze formation was inbound. The pattern repeated: intercept, engage, destroy. The missions lasted until nightfall. In total, American fighters shot down 71 kamikaze aircraft that day. 14 reached their targets. The Mustang squadrons logged their highest sortie count of the war. The battle for air superiority had become a battle of interception speed. On January 10, 1945, at Clark Field in the Philippines, Staff Sergeant Bill Thompson supervised the final inspection of a P-51D before its 200th combat mission. The Mustang, serial number 441221, had arrived in theater in September. It had flown continuously since: bomber escort, ground attack, patrol. The aircraft showed wear. Paint was chipped. Exhaust stains darkened the cowling, but mechanically it remained sound. Thompson checked the engine logbook. The Packard Merlin had 387 hours since overhaul. Oil consumption was normal. Compression readings were within tolerance. The airframe showed no structural cracks. Thompson signed the inspection sheet. The Mustang was mission ready. Around him, the flight line stretched with rows of P-51s, over 80 aircraft assigned to the 348th Fighter Group. The transition from P-38s was complete. Mustangs now dominated the 5th Air Force's fighter inventory. Maintenance was easier. Parts were abundant. The single-engine design simplified logistics. Engine changes that took Thompson's crew 2 days on a P-38 now took 8 hours on a Mustang. The reliability statistics were remarkable. The P-51D averaged 84% mission-ready rate, compared to the P-38's 67%. Fewer aircraft were needed to maintain operational strength. Production costs were lower. $50,985 per Mustang versus $97,147 per Lightning. The numbers justified the transition, but Thompson sometimes thought about the P-38s. They had been impressive machines, fast, powerful, resilient. The twin-engine layout had saved pilots when one engine failed. The P-51 offered no such redundancy, but it was faster, more maneuverable, and available in greater numbers. The war rewarded those advantages. Thompson walked to the operations tent. A mission briefing was underway. Target: Japanese airfields near Formosa. 16 Mustangs would fly escort for B-25 bombers. Expected resistance was light. Japanese air strength had collapsed. Fuel and ammunition were plentiful. The mission would last 4 hours. Thompson watched the pilots walk to their aircraft. They moved with routine confidence. The Mustang had become familiar, trusted. The early concerns, single-engine vulnerability, limited Pacific experience, had faded. The aircraft had proven itself across hundreds of missions. Thompson returned to the maintenance area. Another Mustang needed an engine change. The work continued, steady and predictable. The war was winding down, but the machines still flew. In 3 months, the Philippines would be secured. In 6 months, the war would end. The Mustang would outlast both. Its service would continue into the jet age, flying in Korea, training new pilots, setting records. But in January 1945, it was simply the best fighter available. Fast, reliable, effective. That was enough. On March 15, 1945, at Iwo Jima, Lieutenant Frank Dunn sat in the cockpit of his P-51D and watched the sun rise over Mount Suribachi. The island had been secured in February after brutal fighting. Now it served as an emergency landing strip for damaged B-29 super fortresses returning from Japan, and as a forward base for Mustang squadrons escorting those same bombers. Dunn had arrived on Iwo Jima 2 weeks earlier. His squadron's mission was unprecedented, long-range escort for B-29s striking Tokyo, 660 miles north. The Mustang's range made it possible. With 2 110-gallon drop tanks, the P-51D could fly 1,300 miles. The round trip to Tokyo and back was 1,020 miles. Margins were thin. At 07:15, Dunn started his engine. 72 Mustangs taxied onto the runway. The B-29s had departed earlier, flying slower. The fighters would catch them over the ocean. Dunn took off at 07:32 and climbed to 8,000 feet. The flight north took 2 hours and 40 minutes. At 10:12, Dunn's formation spotted the B-29's 108 heavy bombers in staggered boxes. Japanese fighters rose to meet them. Dunn counted at least 30 Zeros, Hayates, and several new Kawanishi N1KJ Shudens. The engagement began at 25,000 feet. Dunn dove on a Hayate climbing toward the bombers. He fired from 300 yards. The Hayate rolled left and dove. Dunn followed. The Mustang's speed advantage allowed him to close rapidly. He fired again. Hits sparkled along the Hayate's fuselage. It nosed over and fell away trailing smoke. Dunn climbed back to the bomber's stream. A Shiden attacked from above. Dunn reversed hard, pulling 6 Gs. The Shiden overshot. Dunn fired a deflection shot. The Shiden's canopy shattered. It spun downward. The battle raged for 22 minutes. Japanese pilots fought skillfully, but they were outnumbered. The Mustang's speed and firepower overwhelmed them. By 10:34, the Japanese broke off. The B-29s continued to target. At 10:47, they dropped their bombs on aircraft factories near Tokyo Anti-aircraft fire was intense. 2 B-29s were hit. One fell out of formation, engines burning. Another struggled to maintain altitude. The Mustangs escorted the bombers south. The damaged B-29 ditched 50 miles from Iwo Jima. Rescue aircraft were dispatched. The remaining bombers landed safely. Dunn touched down at Iwo Jima at 14:21. His fuel gauge showed 28 gallons remaining, barely enough for 15 minutes of flight. The mission had lasted 7 hours and 9 minutes. Intelligence officers confirmed 18 Japanese aircraft destroyed. 3 B-29s were lost. Over 1,100 crewmen reached home because the Mustangs had been there. The escorts would continue daily until the war ended. On April 7, 1945, at Kadena Airfield on Okinawa, captured 2 weeks earlier, ground crews worked under arc lights to prepare 40 P-51 Mustangs for the next day's missions. The invasion of Okinawa had triggered a massive Japanese aerial counter-offensive. Kamikaze attacks intensified. Between April 6 and April 7, over 350 suicide aircraft struck the American fleet offshore. Combat air patrols flew continuously. Mustang squadrons rotated through dawn to dusk cycles. Maintenance crews worked 18-hour shifts. Staff Sergeant Bill Thompson, now assigned to the 21st Fighter Group, supervised engine changes on 3 Mustangs simultaneously. All 3 had exceeded 400 hours since overhaul. Normally, engines were changed at 300 hours, but the operational tempo was relentless. Aircraft couldn't be grounded. Thompson and his crew worked through the night. By 05:30 on April 8th, 2 engines were installed and tested. The third required additional work, a cracked exhaust manifold. A replacement part was located, installed, and inspected. The Mustang returned to flight status at 00712. Thompson logged the work and moved to the next aircraft. Sleep was scarce. Coffee was constant. The work had a rhythm: diagnose, repair, test, document, repeat. Around Thompson, the evidence of sustained operations was everywhere. Aircraft showed combat damage, bullet holes patched with aluminum, shattered canopies replaced, tail sections straightened. One Mustang had returned, with half its rudder shot away. The pilot had landed successfully. The rudder was rebuilt overnight. The Mustang flew again the next morning. The intensity couldn't last indefinitely. Pilots showed fatigue. Mechanics made mistakes. But the Japanese aerial offensive was weakening. Interception rates improved. On April 12th, kamikaze sorties dropped to 110. On April 16th to 70. By May, organized resistance had collapsed. The Mustang's role in this attrition was measurable. Between April 6th and June 22nd, P-51 squadrons at Okinawa flew 8,120 sorties and claimed 427 confirmed kills. Losses totaled 31 Mustangs, primarily to ground fire and operational accidents. The kill-to-loss ratio exceeded 13-1. The strategic effect was decisive. Kamikaze attacks, though devastating, failed to stop the invasion. Air superiority remained with American forces. The Mustang's speed, range, and firepower made sustained interception possible. Slower aircraft couldn't have maintained the tempo. Thompson didn't see the big picture. He saw engines, fuel pumps, and worn tires. But he understood the connection. Every aircraft he returned to service meant another mission flown, another attack intercepted. The work mattered. On June 21st, Okinawa was declared secured. Kamikaze attacks ceased. The operational pace slowed. Thompson's crew finally rotated to rest status. They had been on continuous duty for 76 days. Thompson slept for 14 hours. When he woke, he returned to the flight line. There was always another aircraft needing work. The war wasn't over yet. On July 5, 1945, at North Field on Tinian Island, Lieutenant Frank Dunn sat in the cockpit of his P-51D Mustang and looked northwest toward Japan. The war was nearly over. Germany had surrendered in May. Japan fought on, but defeat was inevitable. The B-29 campaign had reduced Japanese cities to ash. The Navy's blockade had strangled supply lines. Invasion plans were set for November, though rumors spoke of a new weapon that might end the war sooner. Dunn had flown 127 combat missions. He had survived when many hadn't. His squadron had lost 14 pilots since January, some to enemy fire, some to mechanical failure, some to operational accidents, mid-air collisions, weather, navigation errors. The Mustang had brought most of them home, but not all. Dunn thought about the P-38 he had flown in 1944. It had been a good aircraft, reliable and fast. But the Mustang was better, faster, more maneuverable, longer range, easier to maintain. The transition had been necessary. The war demanded it. Still, Dunn missed the Lightning's twin engines. The redundancy had been comforting. In the P-51, one engine failure meant ditching. Dunn had seen it happen twice. Both pilots were rescued, but the vulnerability was real. Dunn's logbook showed 847 flight hours in the P-51D. He knew the aircraft intimately, its strengths, its limits, its quirks. The Mustang had become an extension of his body. He didn't think about flying it anymore. He just flew. At 08:30, the mission briefing began. Target, an airfield near Osaka. 40 Mustangs would escort B-29s. Expected opposition was minimal. Japanese air strength had evaporated. Dunn listened without emotion. The mission was routine now. At 10:15, Dunn started his engine and taxied to the runway. The Mustang accelerated smoothly. At 120 miles per hour, he lifted off and climbed northwest. The flight to Japan took 3 hours. The B-29s bombed without interference. No Japanese fighters appeared. Anti-aircraft fire was scattered and ineffective. Dunn circled overhead, waiting. Nothing happened. The bombers turned southeast. Dunn escorted them back to Tinian. He landed at 16:47. The mission had been uneventful. Intel officers debriefed him briefly. No kills, no losses, just another mission. Dunn walked to his quarters. He was tired. Not from the flight, but from the accumulation. 20 months of combat, over 800 hours in the air, constant adrenaline, constant vigilance. The Mustang had kept him alive. Its speed had saved him more times than he could count, but speed wasn't enough. Survival required luck, skill, and the willingness to keep flying. Dunn lay on his bunk and closed his eyes. The war would end soon. He would go home. The Mustang would remain, fighting other wars, training other pilots. Its legacy was secure. For Dunn, it was simply the machine that had brought him through. That was enough.